Greetings, Mark Garang here, publisher of The Sun, and today my guest is George Epstein, who's a frequent guest of ours. George is a Sun columnist and kind of man about town.
Thanks for having me. It's
I consider
fun.
you a Renaissance man, George.
Man about town, I'm not sure, but okay.
All right, so lots to talk about. We always kind of but start with education, because you're on the board of trustees at UNH, and you started off as a teacher in between your illustrious career as an entrepreneur, right?
38 years as a school district moderator in Madison.
Okay, that's the claim to fame then.
Yeah, that's the real one,
right.
yeah.
All right, so big news with the town of Conway. Voters supported the default budget, which basically nicked $1 million off the school board's budget, which has forced the school system to do something to save the money. And what they've chosen to do, which was just announced yesterday, is to close Pine Tree, which has been, so there's a couple things. One, do they close the school or try to save money someplace else? And which school? And I think last time you were on, you actually, I think I have this correct, is that you were saying, yeah, they could just, if they close a school, they could eliminate an administrator or two or just be more efficient. So, go ahead.
One of the points I made was that you could keep the 3 open and reduce the number of administrators by having a principal who covers 2 schools, rather than having the kids traveling longer distances, make the principals drive back and forth. But that's probably not going to happen, and it does seem like there's more money to be saved by physically closing a school. The 2 of the 3 elementary schools are physically adequate, big enough in order to house the elementary school students, the K through 6 students in Conway. So it's not an unreasonable thing to close a school down. What's a shame is that the town of Conway is physically a big town, a lot of square miles, and the distance from one end to the other is a long way. And I think the amount of time kids spend on school buses is a lousy way to spend your time. And I don't like to see kids have to spend a good chunk of their day sitting on school buses. So to me, one of the big factors would be to really take into consideration what the bus routes look like and what the travel associated with it is. And that would probably be the bigger factor for me in terms of deciding which school, rather than the issue of which one has town water and which one has a higher resale value and so on. So Pine Tree, does it make sense? Sure, unless you're a kid in South Conway who has to travel some rather long distance to Conway L or to John Fuller.
It is I mean, you say it's not to debate it, but you say it's a big geographic, but it kind of isn't. I mean, if you go to Center Conway, I mean, so you go that way, or you just go down to Conway Village. I mean, it's just not that much of a distance.
Not from Pine Tree to Conway L, but when you head off into South Conway to the main border, you're getting back there a ways and you're going longer distances. But that would be a factor for me. That'd be part of what I would be considering. The other trick to it, of course, is that the school board and the school administration wanted another year to go without having to close a school down and do it rather precipitously. It's middle of April, and getting things all organized and set up to go to work on beginning of September is a little bit of a challenge. There are the legal issues associated with teacher contracts and getting rid of teachers that you don't think you're going to need or that you might not need, and how do you warn them and give them adequate notice that they don't have a job coming up. And then you have the other issue, which is that a lot of the people who voted to reduce the budget to the default budget level thought that the savings could occur from within the overall operating budget without having to close a school precipitously, to close it down by September, this coming September. And so should the school board be looking hard, the Conway School Board be looking hard at the the other expenses and to see whether they should be more closely managing those and be able to make those savings without having to close a school for another year.
Right. I mean, what's your gut? I mean, some people say, well, because they came out right off, I mean, 2 days, I mean, a week later, okay, we're going to close Pine Tree. So a few people are saying, oh, it's just a trial balloon to see what the community, what kind of reaction. And then the other part of that is that, you know, you ran a sizable business, obviously. I mean, a $40 million budget, if you had to take $1 million out of it, you probably could do it. So particularly in a school system where there's just usually an extra layer of bureaucracy here and there. And even one of the school board candidates said she thought, who was elected actually, thought that there was too many administrators. I don't even know what that means. But I mean, what's your sense and what's your gut feeling about it? It seems like they could find $1 million. Then the other thing is on personnel. When you talk
How many
about,
ave to this question are we going to have here?
It's a complicated question.
Okay, all right.
You know, and so the other part of that is the budget part, but the other part is laying off people. And I know that there are at least a dozen people who are moving out of the district, teachers and whatever, just because they move, right? And there's a whole bunch of unfilled positions. So do you really think that they're going to have to lay people off?
Oh, I don't know.
Right.
And in fairness, I'm a Madison guy, and we don't have a cooperative school district for our high school. There are a lot of things wrong with, in my opinion, the governance. But Conway has to make those decisions, and the Conway School Board has to make those decisions. Having said that, the number of students that are in the Conway School District doesn't support the staffing that we have. I wouldn't be looking to, and we have talked about this, making 100% of those cuts from the budget. I'd be using some of the savings that would occur from reducing those positions to increasing the salaries in the Conway School District, particularly among teachers. The turnover in teachers is higher than it should be. We don't have teachers, particularly great teachers, staying as long as we would like them to, and I do think there are savings to be had by reducing the overall staffing, much of which could be handled through normal attrition that wouldn't require a significant number of layoffs. So I don't know in detail what those numbers should be, but I'd like to see, as a former Conway taxpayer, I'd like to see some savings occurring in terms of the number of staff members associated with the Conway School District, whether they close a school or not. And I would like to see some of the savings associated with that applied to increasing salaries.
Yeah, and I think, and what do you think about this, the concept that they could just do it without closing a school? I mean, out of a $40 million budget. And I know you don't know the budget, but.
No, I think the answer is yes. Of course, you know, 3% or whatever that savings would have to be is a manageable, numerically solvable problem and something that could be done. But I don't know the details of the impact associated with that. There are priorities that need to be dealt with, and the issues associated with behavioral problems, the issues associated with depression, absenteeism, and so on. We're not hearing a lot of solutions from the Conway School District or from any school district around the country. All these schools are struggling with that. Absenteeism across America is up by 30–40% from where it was pre-COVID, and no one's solving that. And it appears to be the case in Conway. They're suffering from those kinds of issues as well. Is there a place we could throw some money that would address that? That would be meaningful. Reducing absenteeism would be a significant plus, but it's not obvious to me that anybody has a solution as to how to spend that money wisely that would really have an impact.
All righty. So the one thing you talk about busing, and I know use busing is just a general term because in my office, which I do most of the time, is just gaze out the window. That's my executive
That was
time.
what I used to do.
Yeah, no.
Yeah.
And I see the school buses go by, these big giant school buses with 3 kids in them. Because, you know, most people go in cars, either their own cars when they're in high school, or parents drive them. One of the ideas, and I realize this is very premature because it's just in the paper today, is they're talking about doing a K through 2 school and a 3rd grade through 5th grade.
Yeah.
Does that, just on its face, my sense would be that's a lot of mixing little kids up in different buses and different routes.
Yeah, I don't know. It'd be silly for me to pretend I've got some expertise on whether that's a good idea or not. But to me, it's an odd configuration and not one that is obvious to me. The amount of travel, if I've got it straight, would be significantly more bus time if I have a school devoted to K through 2 and 3 through 5, and one school devoted means the whole town and all the kids from throughout the town have to make it to that one school, as opposed to choosing the more geographically close school for you. Now, it doesn't seem right to me, but maybe I'm missing something.
Yeah, because it just seems like it's common sense that when families have kids, I mean, usually it's not, usually it's not 10 years apart. Usually the kids are 2, 3, 4, 5 years apart. So chances are, if you got a kid in 2nd grade, you might have one in 5th grade too, or 6th grade. You know what I mean? It's
you have more, and you'd have more overlap of kids, your children in the same school, physically in the same school, convenient for everybody, less busing for everybody. It does seem like a tough call for me. It does seem to me, maybe the big picture for me is that the school board should take into much greater consideration time spent on buses. I find that to be the most wasteful and the poorest use of kids' time. If you're going to use up more kids' time, have them do it in the classroom.
Any thoughts about Madison? We got the contract coming up, the SAU contract coming up in a couple of years, and you're the school moderator. Any sense, is Madison looking at other opportunities for high school kids?
I don't think they have seriously looked at any other alternative. I think that personally I'm horrified that the town of Conway just reelected a person to the Conway School Board who announced that the people from Tamworth and elsewhere should probably go to Moultonborough, that they'd probably be better off in Moultonborough. This is someone who's served on the Conway School Board for many years and is basically saying he's done such a poor job that they might as well go somewhere else. I'm mystified by a few of the decision makers and the kind of attitude they're bringing to it. Conway is going to need kids. To run a cost-effective school district and to have all the services and programs that they want to have, you've got to have an economy of scale. And if like Moultonborough, who has infinite dollars, they don't care about the money, but they don't have enough kids to run that school, and Conway is going to be in much worse shape if they lose the 50% contribution from the sending districts for the operation of Kennett High School. They need that money in order to run an array of good and great programs.
I mean, the COVID really was a disruptor, obviously. For absenteeism is probably hangover from that. Discipline problems a hangover from that because kids were home for a couple of years, and kind of ran rampant. But also, with the SAU kind of not falling apart, but with these other towns thinking about alternatives. You just pointed out, it's a school, kind of intimated it's a school board's fault. Like, why do you think these towns are looking at other places to put their kids? Is it just that we're in a new environment, charter schools are popular and all that, where they're just literally open, their eyes are open and they're looking for a better opportunity? Or do you think it's a problem with the school, with the Conway SAU?
Who is responsible for any organization? The people with the authority to make the decisions about how that organization runs. So the authority to run the Conway Daily Sun rests largely with you. If the Conway Daily Sun screws up, that's your fault, Mark. And the same was true for me at the Echo Group. The Conway School Board has the authority to run the Conway school system. And if the results that you're seeing there, whether it's academics, whether it's expenditures, whether it's the ability to retain and attract the sending districts that you need in order to run a cost-effective school district, that responsibility lies with the school board, and they need to own that. No one else is responsible. It's not the superintendent who's responsible. The superintendent screws up, you fire the superintendent. That's the authority that the school board has. They are the ultimately responsible entity, and they have to take that ownership. And they should be competing with Northeast Woodlands and other charter schools, competing with Moultonborough to attract the students that they want in order to be able to run a school system.
Well, how much, I know you've just pinned it on them, but I mean, there's just these other factors. I mean, the COVID, all that kind of stuff. So
everybody's got that to deal with. And whether it's Moultonborough or Freiburg Academy or, you know, some fancy high school in Newton, Mass, they've got the responsibility to, with the hand they've been dealt, to run the organization they've got. And the Conway Daily Sun, the world doesn't advertise as much in newspapers as they used to. You've got challenges in order to deal with that. I assure you that producing secure electronic medical record software isn't the easiest thing in the world to do. They've got to take...
Which is what you did.
I did, yes.
Yeah.
And to take the hand they were dealt, they are dealt, and to play that hand, that's what they've got to do. They've got to step up.
So you kind of put it at the fault of at the feet of the school board.
Find me somebody else to blame.
Right, okay.
Someone has to be responsible, and that's who it is. In the end, you can argue that the voters are responsible. In the end, they have to elect people who are going to run the school system they want to have, and that's true. But the people who day to day, 364 days of the year, are running that school system are those school board members. There's only one day of the year when the voters vote.
Yeah, and I said in an editorial supporting the default budget is that, you know, I think if this fault a lot can be put on the school board, which obviously they're the ultimate authority. I guess what strikes me about our system is that, and I said in an editorial, like in Berlin, when the city council decides the budget, then the school board is stuck with the budget. So the people who run for the school board tend to be much more education classically focused. But it seems like our decisions over the last many years for candidates on the school board is either you support the budget or you don't, rather than real issues about what's your philosophy on education and program and stuff. And I know that Mike DiGregorio, who's the chair now, I mean, he kind of taken a page out of what you're saying and saying, oh, let's save some money, but let's put it into programming, which is another way of saying teachers. Yeah. You know, but that you don't hear that conversation very often because usually it's about the budget.
Not as much as you should, and part of it might be the way politics have changed. The people who run for school boards today across the country often are more politicized in various ways. They're more red versus blue, and too many of them are interested in the next level of elected office that they might pursue. And I do compare the board that I negotiated the first teacher contract with in Conway, and you had Banker Brown, and you had a Lucy, and you had John Cannell, and you had people who were embedded in the community, people who'd been here for a lifetime typically, but certainly for many years, and people who you were confident, as much as you might disagree with them on issues, you were confident that they had what in their mind were the best interests of the community at heart, the community as a whole. And the budget was a meaningful part of it, the tax rate, absolutely a meaningful part of it, but they owned the output. There was their kids who went to the school system here. It was their kids whose kids might be going to the school system here. And so
Are you saying that the average school board member, without naming names, is a little lower quality?
Oh, no, I wouldn't. I would say that motives have changed, and that to get elected to the school board in Conway is a different kind of challenge. Instead of being chosen solely because of your credibility, long-time credibility in the community, a lot of time people are voting an issue and they pick the board member who's backing their issue, and it might well be the budget, yay or nay, close the school, yay or nay. And that wasn't the case. You were voted as a person. I don't know how else to say it. They were voting the whole person 50 years ago for the school board here, and I'm not sure that's the case anymore. You also have a different population in Conway than you did. All of the Mount Washington Valley's leadership lived in Conway. That's an exaggeration, but our doctors, our lawyers, the ministers, the business owners, the biggest business owners and so on, they all lived in Conway. They don't anymore. many of those people, my guess is most, live in the surrounding towns now. And Conway has a different group of people in town, and people who are running for school board often haven't lived here their whole lives and are not, they might work out of the area, or they might work from home for a business that's 1,000 miles away. And so I just, it's a different level of connection, and I just sound like a whiny old man now, that things aren't like they used to be in the good old days, but it's different than it used to be.
Yeah, it seems like that way, and it's really not a knock on anybody who's doing it, because the young people who are involved with town politics now, which is great. Planning board's a great example of that with Ben Colbath and Eliza Grant, and they'll be our esteemed town fathers in years. But it did seem as though I supported Jack Cuddy, who got smoked as a selectman. Pretty much anybody I endorsed or supported. So don't ever ask for my endorsement.
I won't.
No, don't. But but it reminded me of Jack Cuddy days, when he was selectman 20, 25 years ago, and it really was more like a who's who. Like, I mean, Teresa Kennett was a selectman, Bard was a selectman, and, like you say, the Lucys were selectmen, and maybe it was a simpler time then, that there was just a small cadre of quote-unquote town leaders that is a little more spread out now, and partly because the people who have money tend to live out of town, for one thing.
Yeah, and you still see that coziness in some of the sending towns, but you also see some disruption to that. Madison had a kind of an interesting, and I won't speak about it in detail as the town moderator, but a disruptive election occurred in Madison, and Tamworth has had some shakeups in terms of the old families that were there, and I think that's. They still exist out in the sending towns. There's more stability. There's less turnover in the community and the population. My boogeyman is the STRs and the impact of the STRs in Conway.
You mean your boogeyman that you don't like them, or you?
Yeah, the disruption that the STRs have caused to our communities, and the introduction of lobbying and money to the decision making associated with our small towns, our planning boards and our ZBAs and so on, the attempts to influence those things, because money is involved now, and relatively big money is involved.
Well, I wish you'd be in Conway and help me with my STR ordinance, because that one got smoked too. And I know that planning board, even though they had their own specific reasons why they didn't recommend it, and once you're not recommended by the planning board, it's not gonna pass. But I'll tell you, it's too bad.
Let me ask you a question.
Sure.
So we've made the whole STR issue so complicated and so legalistic, and all the court cases pending throughout the state and so on. The bottom line for me is a simple question, and that's the question of whether an STR, a short-term rental, people coming in and out every few days, is a commercial business or not, and if it is, then it shouldn't be allowed in residential areas, and it should be permissible in commercial areas. And if it's not if it's not a commercial business, then I guess it does have the right to operate within a residential area. And I think that simple question needs to be decided in the state of New Hampshire. Now, whether it's decided in the courts or whether it's decided by the state legislature, I'm starting to think that's going to be a necessary decision that has to be made. I'd like it to be made by each town. I'd like them to be able to make that decision and establish their own zoning requirements and approvals or not approvals, or regulations or no regulations. And I think I'm on a little bit of a mission for, and I mentioned it in a recent column, for home rule to occur. So only about a dozen states in America are home rule states, which means that a town can do what it wants unless the state specifically doesn't permit it, passes a law that says you can't do that. But otherwise, a town can do what it wants. New Hampshire and most of the states are not home rule states. And what that means is the town can only legislate, can only do what the state permits it to do. And I think that's can I say this, ass backwards?
Sure.
That
We call it rear backwards.
rear backwards. It's a much classier operation. Please blip that out for me. And so I would feel so much more comfortable if those decisions were made community by community, because what's right for Manchester when it comes to STRs, or Portsmouth or Hanover, which has an interesting set of problems associated with it, is very different from what's right for Conway. What's right for Conway might not be what's right for Madison. And so I'd really like to see the authority for those decisions to be made by the towns. And that takes me back to the whole issue of Kennett High School. Half of Kennett High School is Conway's. The kids are half Conway's. The cost of is half Conway's. Fine. But half of Kennett High School is the sending districts. The students are from the sending districts, and the money is from the sending districts. And there's no authority and no capacity for the sending districts to be able to influence the decisions made around Kennett High School. So to me, I guess I'm a fan of democracy, is what it boils down to.
Well, you're a town moderator, it's in your blood.
And local, that's right, and it is in my blood, and local control is in my blood.
Not to go back into the school topics, but you think the school should change into a system into a cooperative then?
Absolutely. Kennett High School absolutely should be a cooperative. Why in the world are you going to have a school that's better run, more engaged with the community and the families that send the kids to those schools, unless you give them some authority to influence the decision making?
So how would a school board look like as a cooperative?
Let's say you had 7 people. You could vote on it 2 different ways. One is to have it be everyone an at-large member. And so conceivably, Conway would still control all 7 seats if they all voted for the Conway candidates, but they wouldn't. I'm not worried about that. But in some cooperatives, they are regionally set up, and each town would get 1 and Conway would get 3 or whatever it was, and you might have 9 members.
Didn't we have that before?
No.
We've never had a cooperative.
No, at one point or another.
I thought there was a weighted vote about stuff.
Well, that's on the SAU.
Right.
So in terms of hiring a superintendent, or other issues that the SAU decides, which are relatively modest in importance, those can be done using a weighted vote. Frequently, they don't even bother because it's unanimous one way or the other, so nobody cares. And of course, you have SAU 9, and then separately, you have SAU 13 with Tamworth, Freedom, and Madison. And so we would still be excluded there. But no, the weighted vote and all that, that has nothing to do with the operation of the high school on a day-to-day basis and the decisions made as to how Kennett High School would operate. And the right thing to do, as one of the things that studies show, I hate using that phrase, but if you do any homework at all, you see that where communities are most involved with their schools, you have the most effective schools, the most successful schools, the most academically productive schools. And the way to get communities involved is to give a sense of ownership and a role in the control and the governance of the school. And there's nothing inappropriate about that. Half of the school was paid for and half of the school is populated by the sending district.
So do you think that, is it mechanically reasonable to expect that we should be considering going to a cooperative?
Absolutely. And at one time or another, over the past 50 years, every single town that sends kids to Kennett High School have voted for a cooperative school district. But it has to be, the participants in the cooperative have to be unanimous. All the towns that would form the cooperative would have to make it happen, and it never happened at the same time. Even Conway has voted for a cooperative school district at some point in the past. Didn't we do that?
Wasn't it 10 years ago that we went through that exercise?
Oh, no, it was much more than that. As far as when there was a formal vote for the creation, it was well before the current sending district contract. But, so I have a strategy for doing it, which is that Bartlett and Jackson really have no option but to attend Kennett High School. But Jackson's tax rate is so out of whack that I'd leave them out. I would take Bartlett and Madison and Conway and really Albany and Eaton as the towns that would form an initial district. And you couldn't include Freedom because it would depend on the funding formula as to whether they would vote for it. I'm not sure you should include Tamworth. I'd like to, but Tamworth might be too serious about going to Moultonborough to want to participate. But I think you pick a subset of the towns, you create the cooperative, and then you invite other towns to join that cooperative once you've got the funding formula and everything in place. But the interests of Bartlett and Conway and Madison and Eaton and Albany, their interests are very aligned. Similar tax rates and a commitment to Kennett High School, geographic commitment to Kennett High School. Let's form a single unit to govern that and then invite those other towns to join. And then you only need 5 instead of 7 or 8 different towns to all simultaneously vote to pass it. It's not that hard to do. Other districts have done it all over New Hampshire.
All right, so we're out of time.
Oh, goodness.
Yeah, I know. I know it goes quickly, but it would be a great subject for a column. And start floating it.
I've written about it a little bit in the past. You got it. You'll see a
all right,
column.
George.
Thanks
Always a
very
pleasure.
much.
Okay, take
Always
care.
fun.
All right.